Robert Meeropol, the adoptive father of the young sons of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, Robert Meeropol. Robert Meeropol joins us now from Massachusetts, put out a piece and call of support for Julian Assange because his parents, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, the most famous case, the only people to be executed under the Espionage Act that possibly the U.S. government is looking to charge Julian Assange with. Juan?
Well, Robert, I'd like to ask you this whole issue, as you were saying, about the government possibly trying to look at the being able to charge Julian Assange under the Espionage Act. Even if you get past, or those who believe that the Espionage Act is constitutional, the mere idea of charging someone who is not a U.S. citizen, who wasn't even in the country, with a violation of the U.S. Espionage Act really begins to take the American legal system to whole new realms of arrogance, it seems to me, in terms of its power around the world.
Well, yes, that's true, but we shouldn't forget the case of Manuel Noriega, the United States, and of course we have Guantanamo and black site prisons all over the world. Our government rejects the universal jurisdiction of other nations or of the World Court, but as far as we're concerned, we are free to indict, and if we can get our hands on anyone or anywhere all over the world, and that is, I would say, a prerogative of empire. It's a reality we face. It's not one that I approve of, but I think it's the reality of today.
I want to go to some more news footage from June 1953. These reports are right before the Rosenbergs were executed, after their final appeals were rejected. One newscaster here lampoons the protesters who demonstrated in support of the Rosenbergs.
Inside the stone walls of Sing Sing prison, the Rosenbergs wait all day for word of their fate. It's now more than 2 years since they were first sentenced to die for organizing atomic espionage for Russia. Rabbi Irving Kozlow, a prison chaplain, goes in. He will not leave until after the execution, which is being held before sundown because the setting of the sun this Friday marks the beginning of the Holy Sabbath in the Jewish calendar. A matron, Mamie Creighton, comes out after seeing Ethel Rosenberg. She says the woman refuses to believe she's going to die, insists she is innocent. State troopers surround the prison to prevent demonstrations. Again, there are none. The hours pass slowly. Julius Rosenberg, now 35, his wife Ethel, now 37, married 14 years and 1 day, parents of 2 boys, tonight dined on hard-boiled eggs, macaroni salad, and tea. There was no time for the usual last meal. Their fate is decided in Washington. And here is that story from David Brinkley.
In these last minutes before the Rosenbergs are electrocuted at Sing Sing prison, here's how in Washington today their attorneys went through the last possible legal maneuvers to save them. It began at noon at the Supreme Court. Normally quiet, but today surrounded by groups of the curious. The court met at noon. At 12:06, it announced a decision to end the Rosenberg stay of execution. That was a stay granted 2 days ago by Justice Douglas. That seemed to be the end, but it wasn't. Their attorneys promptly asked for another stay while they appealed to President Eisenhower again for clemency. The court said it would consider it. Meanwhile, the lobbyists who came to Washington to work for the Rosenbergs kept up their parade in front of the White House. People riding by in automobiles shouted and asked why they didn't go to Russia. But there was no other disorder, so the police left them alone. They even sang a little song somebody wrote especially for this occasion, but the picketing and singing did them no good. Because at the Supreme Court by this time, the government's lawyers, having won their case, were leaving. The court had refused again to delay the execution. A few minutes later, Emanuel Bloch, chief counsel, came out, read us a telegram he had sent to the president.
For sake of American tradition, prestige, and influence, urge redress for Rosenberg. Demand you be afforded sufficient time to consider this serious matter.
The president's answer came quickly. Here it is, read by a White House press officer.
The following is part of a statement just issued by the President of the United States. I am convinced that the only conclusion to be drawn from the history of this case is that the Rosenbergs have received the benefit of every safeguard which American justice can provide. There is no question in my mind that their original trial and a long series of appeals constitute the fullest measure of justice and due process of law. Throughout the innumerable complications and technicalities of this case, no judge has ever expressed any doubt that they committed most serious acts of espionage. Accordingly, only most extraordinary circumstances could warrant executive intervention in the case. When democracy's enemies have been judged guilty of a crime as horrible as that of which the Rosenbergs were convicted, when the legal processes of democracy have been marshaled to their maximum strength to protect the lives of convicted spies, when in their most solemn judgment the tribunals of the United States have adjudged them guilty and the sentence just, I will not intervene in this matter.
The President and the Attorney General were standing by to the last in case the Rosenbergs decided at the last minute they wanted to talk.
Well, in this news clip from the Sing Sing prison, a reporter who witnessed the executions describes Ethel Rosenberg's death in the electric chair. Like many in the news media at the time, the reporter, Bob Considine of the International News Service, indicates that he supports the executions.
She died a lot harder. When it appeared that she had received enough electricity to kill an ordinary person and had received the exact amount that had killed her husband, the doctors went over and pulled down the cheap prison dress, a little dark green printed job, and placed the placed the stethoscopes to her, and then looked around and looked at each other rather dumbfounded and seemed surprised that she was not dead. Believing she was dead, the attendants had taken off the ghastly strappings and electrodes and the black belts and so forth. And these had to be readjusted again, and she was given more electricity, which started again a kind of a ghastly plume of smoke that rose from her head and went up against the skylight overhead. After two more of those jolts, Ethel Rosenberg had met a maker. She'll have a lot of explaining to do, too.
That was Bob Considine of the International News Service describing the execution of Ethel Rosenberg. Our guest is Robert Meeropol in Massachusetts, her younger son, Juan.
Well, Robert Meeropol, you were just a young boy at the time, and this ghastly description. I'm wondering your response, and also as new evidence has emerged of indicating that your parents were not involved in certainly in espionage toward sending atomic secrets to the Russians, and that your mother was completely innocent. Your sense?
Well, first of all, you know, I'm sure it's always hard for me to hear Bob Considine's description, to relive the last day of my parents' lives, and people may wonder, you know, how I can react in such a cool and calm manner. I mean, part of it is, as I've dedicated my life through the Rosenberg Fund for Children to providing for the educational and emotional needs of the children of targeted activists in the United States. My people who I consider kindred spirits, people suffering what I've suffered, and that finding that positive outlet for my grief and rage and anger has really enabled me, again, to respond in a positive manner. That said, I think it's very fitting that you focused on my mother, particularly in the context of the charges that Julian Assange may face, and that is conspiracy. My mother was involved in this case because she was deemed or dubbed a conspirator. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit espionage. All that means is that, all that conspiracy means is that two or more people got together and planned to commit an illegal act and took one step in furtherance of that plan. Could be a phone call, could be a conversation. Well, that was used in my parents' case. My parents' chief accusers, David and Ruth Greenglass, testified that my mother was present during the critical espionage meeting, and she typed up David Greenglass's handwritten notes, descriptions of a sketch that supposedly gave away the secret of the atomic bomb. Well, it's come out since that this testimony was false and that David Greenglass himself has even admitted that. But even if it were true, that would mean that the United States government executed someone for typing. But it's not surprising that the government would use conspiracy, whether it's against my parents or whether it's against the WikiLeaks people. Because if you're anybody who engages in conversation or discussion, and the government can get one person to testify that that discussion was to leak classified material or to transmit information to the Soviet Union, in my parents' case, they could be swept up in the dragnet. And you could get people to rat out their friends in order to get more lenient sentences. It sows distrust among the community of support. It scares other people into silence. And so what we see here is, if there is a criminal indictment for conspiracy, not an attack on just Julian Assange himself, but on the entire community of support that is seeking to promote the very revolutionary idea that the people have the right to know what their government is doing. That's what this ultimately is all about. And every left wing, every progressive organizer, every organizer in general, how can you engage in organizing, in getting groups of people to protest, in coordinating activities without engaging in what the government would term a conspiracy? And so it is a threat to all of us. And that is really why I issued my call, for us to recognize this. This Espionage Act of 1917 has been this sword of Damocles, sitting quietly, mostly unused, ready to spring out and attack dissenters. And when you have it in the context of the growing secrecy that we face today,
we have 5
and
seconds.
An authoritarian-oriented Supreme Court, it is a danger to us all.
Robert Meeropol, we want to thank you very much for being with us, younger son of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, founder and executive director of the Rosenberg Fund for Children. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez, our website, democracynow.org. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.